Okay. Hello. Okay. I got confused there for a second, but I think we are live. Let me just double check. Yep. I think we're good. Sorry about that. Too many buttons. So this is a semi-impromptu, quick, I need coffee session. And good morning, evening, afternoon. And I just wanted to share an interesting thing that I discovered yesterday when working with a colleague. And anyone who has used Nav or Business Central for a long time, this may be totally obvious and probably don't even think twice about it. But as someone who has come from Dynamics GP, my colleague and I stared at this like, wow, this is weird. It's weird for us. It's different. It's makes sense, but it's just very different than how we're used to doing things and dealing with these things. And this relates to sell to, ship to, bill to on, in this case, a sales invoice, for example. So if I go into here, you'll see, and this is kind of the part that I didn't happen to notice. And even if I would have seen it and paid attention to it, it probably wouldn't have registered. So you'll notice that on this invoice page, there is a little sell to label. It says, okay, your customer is 10,000 A Datum Corporation, and there's a little sell to label. Okay, that's great. And I'm like, okay, that's your customer. Makes total sense. But then down below, we have shipping and billing. And I didn't put it together that those are three kind of different things. So totally obvious. You may be saying, duh. But anyway, it was interesting for me and my colleagues. So let me see if I can hop over to Business Central. And yes, my license is expiring. So, okay. So we have Business Central. And I'm going to open sales invoices. And if I click on one of these sales invoices for A Datum Corporation, I can see, okay, we have customer 10,000 A Datum Corporation, and we have a sell to address. And I'm thinking, okay, so for no particular reason, we said, well, what if this was like this? And we change the name of the customer on the actual invoice. And there are some business use cases for this. I'm going to press tab now. Wait, what is this message? This customer is not registered. To continue, choose one of the following options. And we're thinking, what? It's customer 10,000. I just wanted to change the name for this particular invoice. Like maybe it gets sent to this customer or that customer, or maybe it's a web order. And this is what we've done in Dynamics GP is we have a generic web customer, and the customer information is not important. We just override that, what we do, an address override, as I call it, with the actual e-commerce consumer information and address. So we're puzzled that even though the customer number stays the same on this invoice, changing the customer name results in a validation event. And it says, no, 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 you cannot change this. Like, I don't know who this customer is now. And so we went through the actual code on the page and saw what it was doing. And it is apparently validating both customer number and customer name. And I couldn't find a setup option. It didn't look like this is configurable. There was an if statement that seemed to kick in, but I couldn't tell whether this could be disabled or overridden or what triggered this, or if it is always triggered. So our options here are create a new customer card for A Datum Corporation Limited, which we don't really want to do, or we select an existing customer, meaning a different customer. And I'm like, okay, this is weird. So from the Dynamics GP world, this is a very different type of thing. So I'm just going to re-choose A Datum Corporation, and there it goes. So my interpretation is that this customer information here under general, customer number, customer name, even though it is editable, it is representation of the customer record. It is exposing the customer record. It's not like a copy of the customer data that was created over here. There is a relationship there. It's like, okay, so I get that. I can't change the customer name. It's doing checking there and validation. So what if I want to say, well, actually this order needs to go to suite 123. I'm going to hit tab. Oh, the address you entered for ADatum Corporation is different from the customer's existing address. But I just want this to be for this order. So I can say don't show again. Okay, that's an option. Let me just say update address, just out of curiosity. So it's saying, hey, here's the existing address, here's the entered address, suite 123. Okay. Okay, so now suite 123 is there. So I'm going to exit out, and I'm now going to go into the ADatum Corporation customer. And you'll notice now this customer has been modified to have suite 123 in the address. And so this is a very different approach than what I'm used to in Dynamics GP, in that the customer record is sacred, it is independent. No matter what you try to do with an order or an invoice, it does not update your master record. And there are pros and cons to these different approaches. There are different use cases, different system designs in the background. And so having someone make a change to customer information on an invoice and having that push back to the customer record, I don't know how I feel about that. Let's say you have 50 customer service reps entering orders all day or taking phone calls or whatever the process is. Yeah, you could have some bad data get pushed with one bad data entry and one click, not really paying attention. So I'm gonna have to look into that further and talk to my colleague Tanya what she thinks about that. I'm kind of surprised by that from the GP perspective, right? This is all relative to what we're used to. Okay, so now let's say that I want to go into customers and I want to click on ADatum Corporation, and I'm going to say, well, they're not really in suite 123. That was a typo. I'm going to fix that, right? So they are actually in suite 234. So I'm going to correct this customer, and that is saved. I'm going to exit. Well, if I go back to my sales invoices and I'm going to open up a different invoice, well, what do you know? The changes to the customer record do not push to the unposted invoices, which I kind of get. That makes sense. It's like the different timing, but it's kind of a weird relationship where changes to the invoice get pushed back to the customer, but changes to the customer do not push the invoice. And I'm sure you could explain that and rationalize that and make that make sense. But it's like we just kind of sat there and said, okay, this is the way it works. We'll deal with it, but it's different for us. So that is the sell to record. And my interpretation is that is the customer. It's essentially the customer. Now, why these are editable fields here, I guess there's a thought that maybe the entering orders or invoices should update the customer record. And you're prompted there, but it's a little different. So, and I guess you could override this. So let's say this is suite ABC. I can hit tab. It's going to warn me. It's saying, hey, this is different. I can say don't show again. So it appears to be an optional thing. So you could do this address override. But in our little test, we were actually using code to insert a new invoice. And that actually generated an error because it was triggering the same validation. So we were puzzled by that. That's why we looked at the UI. So now, okay, so maybe we shouldn't be messing with the sell to. So if the customer wants something billed to a different address or shipped to a different address, then that's not the sell to address. And okay, cool. So the sell to concept was kind of new to us. It was like, okay, there's this thing called a sell to, and that is the customer, and we just didn't have that in GP. So we're adjusting. It's like, okay, so where is the ship to bill to? So we have to go down here to shipping and billing. And okay, so this kind of makes sense. So now we have a shipping and billing. Looks like this side is shipping, the left is shipping, the right is billing. And here you can default the ship to as the default sell to address up above. Makes sense. You can have an alternate shipping address where you can choose from one of the shipping addresses. And as far as I could tell, these are just shipping addresses. It's a dedicated table, ship to address table. Or you can do a custom address. And this is what I think of as our address override, as I call it, for, say, e-commerce web orders from consumers, where you don't really need to store those as individual customer records. So I'm going to change this to, 100 Main Street, and this is number 206, and this is Las Vegas, Nevada. Okay. And this will be Sam Smith instead of Robert. Okay, so it allows me to enter that custom shipping address, and maybe the invoice needs to go to a different address as well. Same deal. You can default to the customer. You can choose another customer, which is interesting. I'll have to think about what are the scenarios where this invoice gets billed to another customer. I guess that's a parent-child relationship. We had those in Dynamics GP, but it was a little more formally structured. This looks like a little more casual, where you can choose a completely different customer on the fly based on invoice to invoice. And then lastly, you have the same as the shipping. You can do a completely custom address. Now, interestingly, it does retain this customer name as the customer, but let's do this as 234 Sycamore Lane, and this is in Charlotte, North Carolina. Okay, so interesting, just nuance about how these addresses are handled for a given invoice. And so a couple of comments here. Josh says the ship to with custom address is the most common thing with a web order scenario. Exactly. And that's the number one scenario that I've had to deal with that in the Dynamics GP world. You have consumer orders coming in via the website. You don't want to store those thousands of customers as individual customer records in your ERP system, because they may never order again. It's not necessarily an ongoing relationship. They came from Amazon, from Walmart, from your omni-channel e-commerce solution. So you just want to use a generic web order customer, and you want to do an address override for the ship to and potentially bill to. And in that case, in the case of BC, we're not going to mess with the sell to customer address. That'll just be a dummy address or your corporate address or something like that. And it's really this shipping and billing address that you're going to override for those e-commerce orders. And then the second comment from Nico, Nikon Nut. Don't know the name there. It could be like a patient, but the invoice goes to health insurance. Exactly. So this might be your patient information. That's who you're selling to, who the services are delivered to. But the shipping and billing could be for the insurance company or the co-insurance, or in many cases, like utilities. I've worked with a couple of utilities. The service address is one thing, but the bill may go to a second address. Like grandparents live at this address, but the son or daughter or the grandkids are actually handling the utility bill. So they want the bill to go to their home address, not to the service address. That's another classic example in the US. So interesting. Not a big deal. Like anyone who's been using this system for years may be like totally puzzled by this distinction. But for those of us coming from outside the BC or NAV world, the sell to is different for us. We didn't really have that distinction in my interpretation. So, a question from Twitch: how would you handle tax for different customers if you have one dummy e-commerce customer with defined VAT posting group if several customers order over the web shop? And so, typically, in my experience, services that I've used like Avalara, they would typically go off of the ship to address. So that, I believe that's the case. That is the recipient of the goods or services, and maybe that could be adjusted to use the bill to. But the ship to would be the person who received, say, a physical good or service, and that would be what is targeted by your tax software or tax rules in order to determine taxation, VAT, sales tax, whatever the case. But yeah, that scenario is definitely handled. And yeah. So anyway, I thought that was interesting, and we didn't notice the 3 different address entities on the invoice, and we were mistakenly having code update the sell to customer and address information, and we got this error, and that's how this came up. So we're like, very interesting. So we learned something, so I thought I'd share that kind of trivial information. But now we know there are 3 distinct address entities. This sell to appears to be pretty tightly tied and validated against the customer. Looks like you can override that, but I'm wondering, I don't think I'd want to, right? I would want this to be the customer because I don't want to accidentally push this up to the customer record. And really, we should be messing with shipping and billing as custom addresses. And with that, thank you for joining me. And there we go. I hope you have a great day. Okay, enjoy.
Good morning, sun. How are you? Skies above. Jeeps